Hello and welcome back to OT, the podcast. We're still here talking about watches, time, and how to spend it. Me, Felix Schultz. You?
Andy Green, from, as Mr. Porter put it, one of the 8 best watch podcasts in the entire planet.
Whoa, we'll get to
Don't take it from us. Take it from Mr. Porter.
We'll get to that a mix of slander and celebration in a second. We'll also in a second, well, probably like 10 minutes to be honest, get to the lovely Mr. Giles Ellis from Schofield Watches.
Where are Schofield based?
Beeding, Upper Beeding in West Sussex.
Yeah, UK watchmaking.
Yeah, I mean, I seem
Giles. There you go.
It's where it's at.
Schofield, huh?
Yeah, could be Schofield. I'm not sure.
I think it's Schofield. Why do they sound familiar?
I don't know.
Sick banter.
I thought you had something like.
No, it was a genuine question. Why do they sound familiar?
They're nice watches. They've been around for a while, and keep listening and find out more about them.
Okay. Well, what's been happening, Felix?
As you so sneakily alluded to, we got a lovely write-up in Mr. Porter, which was lovely. Most of it was lovely, but there was one word. I'm just going to open it up. I'm just going to quote from the article, Andy. Please forgive me while I click things.
Sure. Wait with bated breath.
That I found very, how do they say, problematic? God, I can't even find it.
Problematic?
Well, I mean, I don't know what the UK defamation laws are like, but I'm just going to read from it here. The good bit was where they said, if BBC Radio made a weekly show about watches, it might sound something like this. I'll take that.
Sure.
The bit that I questioned was Australian hosts. That's fine. We're Australian. We're hosts. That's okay. / best friends.
Oh, you take issue with that, do you?
I don't know. As I've always said to you, we're merely professional workplace acquaintances.
That's hurtful. But that's classic Felix.
Classic Felix. Build those walls up, keep them strong, never let anyone
like
in.
Little porcupine over there, just wanting to be loved. Well, it's nice validation. It's nice to appear on a list. There was, Jeremy Kirkland's Blamo, George Bamford's
Worn and Wound.
Yeah, GB Talks. I think we were in some pretty strong company. Yep. So I'm, it was nice. It was nice to see that. If anyone else is doing lists on their favorite podcasts or their favorite,
or if you're, the editor or contributor to like a global media platform,
we appreciate the lovely and free exposure. I wasn't too sure on the BBC front whether or not that was a good thing, but I realised that that is a good thing.
I think it's sort of, for me, it's code for professionalism and silky smooth tones.
For some reason I went to Top Gear.
Well, sure. Hey, speaking of the BBC, that's a terrible segue because the next thing I'm going to talk to is on Netflix and it's now filmed in America. I sent you a message saying I've started a series, the second series of a show that I very much loved called Mixed in Fashion, hosted by Tan France, that first came out in the pre-COVID times and now has finally got a second season.
Sure.
I just watched one episode so far. It's basically it's a reality show. They've got to make fashion designs. The first one was like sponsored, I think, by Ukes, Net-a-Porter, I guess, and had there's Tan France, and this one's got one of the Hadids as a co-host.
Oh, okay.
As well, but I spotted a very specific watch on the wrist of one of the contestants.
What was it?
I would say guess, but I've already told you, so that makes no sense. Seiko X rowing blazers with the, regatta style sort of checker bezel.
Okay, well, and I thought you didn't tell me who it was, so I assumed it might have been Tan, just because he's a Rowing Blazers customer, like he's a fan of the brand.
I don't think.
Do you think this was really a play to appeal to Tan? Can
you imagine Tan France wearing a $500 watch?
I can because he kind of preaches style principles at all budgets.
True.
It's a cool watch regardless of budget. I reckon this was a little bit of subliminal messaging from the contestant trying to get on his good side.
Oh,
it's a pretty smart move.
I've got a better segue.
Okay.
Cool watches regardless of budget. What are we going
Talk
to
to
talk
me.
about, Andy? What's been taking up the news in watch world this week?
MoonSwatch, kind of very hyped up. This is what happens. This is a case study, a lesson,
Mhm.
a cautionary tale in what happens when you hype something up too much and then fail to deliver on it. So we saw, teasers, announcements, rumors,
Only one
something's
teaser,
happening.
to be fair, but everyone frothed it hard.
Everyone, MoonSwatch, there's going to be something in gold. Everyone thought they were going to get a gold MoonSwatch. It was going to be crazy.
What did you
And
think? Can I just say, Revolution put together some mock-ups, of which I had a small role in. I thought they were pretty good. And my sort of take on like what Moonshine Gold would be was, like Apple they've done gold in the past. Hublot has Magic Gold, which is essentially ceramic with an element of gold in it.
yep.
If Moonswatch had made a gold toned bioceramic case with like, I don't know, 2% gold in it,
Mm.
I would have been pretty happy with that.
Well, they didn't do that. They did what looks like a pretty regular MoonSwatch with a gold plated second hand.
Moonshine gold plated secondhand, not just any moonshine gold plated secondhand, but a moonshine gold plated secondhand plated on a full moon.
And so the funny other thing here was someone, I think that I don't know if this is real, but did you see the press release or the images that had the strap which said Mission to Neptune?
I did see that. I didn't know where it was from. There's the image
Like,
I'm looking at now, which I grabbed from, I think, Hidingi or someone.
so
Said,
I don't know if it's been updated. I don't know if it's real, but there was also an image circulating that sort of had Mission to Neptune on the strap, and it hadn't been updated.
into the press files for a hot second.
Yeah, dip in there. But this is, to me, I mean, regardless of the strap, potential strap bungle, those things happen. This is just a lesson in kind of overhyping and not really delivering. I think the other thing is this is only available from 4 boutiques worldwide. I mean, there's not that many Swatch boutiques
I mean,
anyway.
to be honest, that's probably that's not the worst move. Like that sort of limiting it. I mean, yes, it does frustrate people, but also they're going to know how many they've got. They're going to know how many they're going to sell, and I think it's a clearer expectation management than
Sure. The press release itself was a bit
weird, man.
weirdly written.
Someone on our Discord said, I don't know if it was just like Swiss English or Chat GPT.
It was just the tone more than anything. It was just sort of like, yeah, these are going to be hard to get like the last ones. How many are you going to make? Not enough. It was just odd. It was just a bit of a strange take from Swatch.
Again, maybe it's a press release. Maybe they commissioned like someone from Fashionland to do it, or Hypeland.
Some hip young kid. Speaking of watch spotting, I
Were we?
have big fan of a podcast called The Dropout. Elizabeth Holmes, the Theranos kind of founder.
Mm-hmm.
We've probably talked about it. I started watching The Dropout, which was the
Netflix
I want to say
version.
it's on Disney Plus.
Sure.
Documentary version. Watched an episode. Felt like a bit too much work at the time. You know what I mean? Show was just a bit too much work. Anyway, I've gone back to it.
Okay.
It's good. It's enjoyable. The cast has sort of expanded. There's some really kind of strong cameos. I'm into the swing of it. Already sort of everyone knows what happens. I think because they were just sentenced, they just got their like jail time. So I was a bit more like, yeah, let's dip in here and kind of see. Anyway, what I did discover was that Elizabeth Holmes rocked a rollie. She was rocking a little date just with some diamonds in the dial.
Of course she was. I mean,
But yeah, so that's sort of prominent in a couple of watches are prominent, but this is like super prominent. I guess she had a pretty plain style.
Yeah, it stands out more, and also, it's good for a villain edit. Someone wearing a gold watch.
Well, actually, she wore it in real life.
I know, but like if you're making production choices or like wardrobe, it's like, oh, how do we make this person not look like a person of the people? Let's whack a gold watch on them.
Yeah, well, she kind of copied Steve Jobs in the aesthetic of it all. But yeah, so it's called The Dropout. I think it's probably 2 years old or a year old now, but it's pretty solid. Like you kind of grow to hate them, hate the characters, and I guess the real people they're based on, and it tells a really kind of wild story that went on far too long. So yeah,
Wild stories.
Dropout.
That's what we're all about here. I don't know if Giles will have any wild stories, but
I reckon he will.
In a sort of down to earth watch industry kind of way.
Yeah, well, I think there's only one way to find out, Felix.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get him on.
Andy, you know this. One of my biggest gripes about the world of modern watchmaking is that they typically err on the side of caution or even conservatism in their design. This is not something you can say about Schofield and their watches, which have been in the world since 2011. It's a boutique brand made in sunny Sussex that has a distinctive take on the tool watch. And today we're very, very happy to be chatting to founder Giles Ellis. Giles, welcome to OT the podcast.
There he is. Just turns up. Look at that entrance.
There you go. Thank you.
Forgot the coffee.
All
Had to
right,
run back and get it.
Here, present. Okay.
I've got a question for you, Giles, because we're a podcast, obviously. We're not really a visual medium. Describe a Schofield watch to someone who has never seen one.
It's a round watch. It tells the time. You can read the time. They are 44 mil across the base, but that's disingenuous to the intricate case shape, because 44 is seen as a maximal acceptable size for watches. Sure. Anything over that becomes an oversized watch, a category of its own. But it plants on the wrist like a 44 mil watch, but doesn't look like a 44 mil watch. And it's one of our biggest hurdles online is, in fact, articulating that the watch is way more wearable than most 44 mil diameter watches. Having a smaller dial, it tapers the case. The case shape is reminiscent, to me at least, of old lamps, and maybe then there's a link back to lighthouses, which I use a lot in the thematics of the brand. The crystal, unusually, is generally, on most models, set below the lip of the bezel. So there's a little nail click if you are running your nail along the crystal towards the bezel. And again, it gives it that old lamp look, like an old searchlight or an old car headlight, something like that. The lug length at 51 mil is shorter than you would expect from a watch of this size, based on the fact that the straps are rebated into the case. And that's because with the case shape, I wanted to have the feel of a braceleted watch, but on a strapped watch. So I don't like lugless watches where the strap runs into the body of the watch case. So I wanted lugs, but at the same time, by rebating them, it means I've removed what I call skin triangles. So the visible skin triangles that you might get on a dress watch, where the strap is, in fact, quite outbound of the case by quite some way. So the fact that the straps are rebated into the case, and our cases have no underbelly, so there's no profile of case back hanging down below the lug line. So what that means is that the lug line flows into the case back as one ergonomic curve. It's quite subtle, but again, it makes the watch feel planted to your wrist. There's no chance of it capsizing. And that's the other hurdle that we face online, is the fact that people think it's a very tall watch. It is not tall. It is no taller than an Omega Seamaster. But because there's no underbelly, then it has the appearance of everything coming upwards. And it's a little different visually. But one of my proudest moments in design is the realization that I've created a generic round case, right? A round watch, but it is recognizable from across the room. You can tell if somebody's wearing a Schofield under the cuff. You only need to see that side profile. And again, that's very difficult to articulate online. You need people to come and see it and handle it. And that's why we tend to show the watches at an angle. It's why for years now, I've always presented the brand as a mosaic. I cannot articulate Schofield Watch Company in an elevator pitch. It's too much. And so for years and years, I will reveal details to customers about their watches. in our newsletter generally, that they never realized, they never knew. And it's because there's so much that goes into that. So that's just the case shape. Straps, which I've mentioned, is a major part of our business. And we've done hundreds of different strap varieties, and they're all unusual. And the point of that is that the strap being rebaited into the case acts like a frame to the dial. If the dial's a picture, the strap would be the frame, right?
You're right.
And it's very important to me, even on smaller wrists, that the strap is still visible north and south of the watch case. You can still see it. So if you imagine wearing a Breitling for Bentley on a very small watch, the strap will come off the watch and kind of angle back down towards the buckle, and you barely see any strap at all. So that was another reason for rebaiting the strap, was to make sure that it was always visible. So straps is really important to the overall aesthetic of the watches. And straps is interesting to me. I love straps because I source all the materials for the straps, and then the straps are made in Germany. And I wanted machine-made straps, not handmade straps. This is not like a Panerai, where handmade straps is de rigueur. Here we have machine-made straps, so they're consistently the same and the quality is the same. And it's only the top fabrics essentially, and some logos that vary on those. Dials for Schofield are generally always stepped, so we have multiple layers. Clarity is my thing for sure, unless maybe it's what we call bare bones, which are dials that don't have anything on them, or minimal design.
Sure.
A proper bare bones watch, where I will then substitute some of the known design cues that you'll find on Schofields, like the /0, which we've used right from the beginning, like note chart junk. Chart junk is all the superfluous text that you find on watch dials telling you about how wonderful it is. Yeah, we don't.
3 days, automatic, superlative.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't do any of that hyperbolic nonsense at all. But when it's bare bones, then I will substitute those things for basic geometry. So I'm just looking at it in a more architectural nature. So the step in the dial will become more prominent, for example, and we will use materials that make the dials very shifty. I like the fact that in design, you can have, it's a ridiculously pretentious word, perdurance. Okay, and perdurance is something that is a bit like the fact that the design of the watch will continuously reveal itself to you. It's more about, for example, if you buy a Rolex, you know that every detail of that watch before you take ownership of it. There are no surprises. Okay, it's so well known. You flip it over and you see that there's no engraving on the back, but you know that already. So it's not disappointing. It's just one of those things, right? With a Schofield, I want to continue your journey a year into ownership.
Right.
And so the way you handle it, the way the case materials change over time, which is another thing. So we've done bronzes for over a decade now. And even our gold-plated treasure watches, gold-plated over brass, deliberately to wear off and to scratch and then to patinate underneath.
Okay. So
I want the design to keep going. I want it to keep going for a long time. And that's how we do that, by using materials that change in the light, that change when you handle them.
All right. I mean, that's a great answer, especially for
the best description of a watch we've had so far.
I'm getting the vibes because I want to go into the specifics once we kind of cover off the brand, because as Felix mentioned, you're sort of 13 years, 12, 13 years, Felix, into
2011.
So 12 years into the brand, which is quite a long time, more than most, businesses survive a couple, watch brands, they sort of pop up. But you're sort of 2011, that was not long before I really started to get into watches. It was probably the start of Felix's deep interest into watches. It's a long time. And so I think you've just given a really good summary of the brand. And if there's anything clear to me, it's like, I feel like you have a industrial design background, possibly, or a design background. But I want to start with what inspired you to start this business. and how you kind of got into the watchmaking industry.
Well, you're right there. I'll just clear up a couple of those facts.
Sure.
I started designing watches. I have my first design files dated to 2008.
Okay.
But I lived with the designs for my first watch, which was called the Signalman, for a very long time. I had this absolute paranoia that if I was to launch a watch into the world of watches, that I would be laughed at, and it would fall short. And I came at watches initially as a graphic designer, and that does not work. Watches have a language of their own, what we call a register. And I had to learn and understand that particular register to understand what made a Patek Philippe, for example, look so good and never not look good. It doesn't go out of fashion. It stays in classic style of watch language forever. And I had to study that. I had to work out what were those intangible hard points in design that I could adhere to give me a classical feel, a feel where my watches were not fashionable. I didn't want to make fashionable watches. I still don't want to make fashionable watches, but want to make watches that would actually stand the test of time, and people would still covet my watches from 10 years ago as they would my latest watches. In fact, there's no hierarchy between my watches from a design point of view or from a financial point of view. It doesn't matter whether you own our £10,000 black lamp or you own a £3,000 beta. You don't put on your most expensive watch to go out to your poshest dinner party. It doesn't matter. You just own a Schofield. So I was selling watches in 2010, late 2010, a few.
Yep.
And then the launch was at Salon QP 2011. That was my official launch, which is why people think that 2011 is the important date. It is. But I was actually selling watches a little bit before that. So really, I'm about a couple of years at most, it's difficult to tell, than Bremont, older than Bremont.
Yep.
Who were the first British watch company at the level, the only way I can put this is strapping watches to wrists.
Yeah.
Because there were a few English makers prior to us that had kind of dipped their toe in.
Yep.
They may do a lot more hand making of all components, whereas we import Swiss movements and make watches at what I would say is street level. So
do you have to be named Giles to start a British watch company? Is that sort of the...
Do you have to be
called Giles? Like, is it a naming thing?
Yeah, I know, right? It's a strange coincidence, and occasionally I get his emails as well. And,
oh, that's great!
Yeah, really, which is really strange. And even more coincidentally, I was there day before yesterday. So Monday, I went to visit the wing for the first time, and I think that's a podcast I could do in its own right. My experience at the wing. And I've known those guys obviously from the start, and yeah, we'll shelve that one for now,
okay,
and go back. So I got into watches like everybody does. They just find something, they feel as a man that you need a watch. It's that simple, right? Guys have this inherent right to an expensive watch at some point in their life. It's a justifiable purchase. It's just something that happens. It's not argued about. It's got to happen. And I wanted a watch. And back then, it was almost certainly a Panerai.
Sure.
I may have dabbled with a bit of Bell and Ross. I could afford none of it. Okay. Yeah. In fact, the watch I really coveted most of all was an Anibi. Do you know the brand Anibi?
Anibi?
So Anibi is an Italian brand, and he's an ex-Panerai designer. And I just loved it. Really industrial, really heavy. There's no doubt that was an influence on me. I couldn't afford it at all. And so, and this is the truth, right? Ridiculous story, but it's the truth. I devised a money box that went, there was a slot that went between the fridge and the wall, and then went down a chute and would then collect behind the fridge, so I could not get at it. That was going to be my watch saving money box, and it was going to be all the loose change.
Yep.
And my wife was going to be completely happy with that idea. Of course, she wasn't, and she was like, "This is ridiculous. We're going on a family holiday before you have a watch."
Fair.
Of which I totally agree. So instead, coupled with the frustration that the Panerai didn't tick all of my boxes, nor did the Anibi, nor did the Bell & Ross or the Zenith or whatever it was on my list of watches. I already had this collection in my mind. So instead, I distilled all of the things I needed in a watch and started a watch company. But I wouldn't recommend that to anybody, of course. That's a way more expensive route to go down, and than just buying the watch, which would be the sensible thing to do. Just buy the watch and live with 90% rather than suffering compromise, which is something I always really struggle with. So I started designing and, like I said, reviewing and researching everything I needed to do in order to start a watch company. And my business plan really wasn't. It was really one watch for me. That's where it was. But I soon realized that I could not fulfill my needs without tooling. And tooling means minimum orders, right?
Yep,
sure.
And minimum orders for the dials with the vendors that I was using was 100. I could make a one-off case. Yeah. And I could make a one-off machined dial and use off-the-shelf hands and off-the-shelf crown, and there you are. You've got a watch.
Yep.
But that wasn't me. I couldn't cope with that. So it was a question of, okay, let's commercialize this. And the only way I can justify my watch for me was to try and make a business out of it. And so I pushed the button on the case shape, made a chunk of those in Germany. Dials and hands were Swiss, crowns were German. Case back engraving, movements imported from Switzerland. They were Soprod movements. And I had a business, and that's where it started. That's how I began, was basically vanity, right? Yeah. It was basically the fact that I wanted a nice watch and couldn't afford it.
I got a question, and I find this interesting for people, myself included in some ways, that have started businesses out of passion and out of a very specific desire and sort of snowballed it into a career. What is something that you would change or that you regret about those early key decisions you might have made? Like, is there something that you look at it now and you're like, if only 2012 me had done this one thing differently?
Yeah, that's interesting. There's a lot of toxicity and charlatans in the watch business because there's money involved.
Yeah.
Where there's money, there are people who will take advantage of you. And right from the very beginning, I didn't want to pull the wool over anybody's eyes ever. So even in our brochures, if I did a render, which I did all myself, they were really obviously renders. I still wrote render underneath.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want anybody to think that it was trickery. I've never renamed a movement and given it a caliber name of my own.
Yeah.
I totally disagree with all of that absolute nonsense in a world where people want to know more of the details. And as a niche brand, I have a responsibility to share details. That's what comes with a niche brand. A niche brand is the opposite of a high street brand, where you go and see something in a shop, you like it, and you buy it.
Sure.
And that's as deep as it gets. There's very little research required into the backstory of the designers and the manufacturers, whereas I'm at the other end of the scale. Okay, I'm super niche. So with that comes a lot of knowledge sharing. It has to. But at the same time, if you say too much, you erode luxury, right? Yes. If you then tell people all the dirty little, not secrets of the trade, but how unromantic machine is.
How the sausage is made.
Exactly that.
Well, let me ask you this, Giles. Let me ask you this. As a small brand who's doing something niche, who's off the beaten path a little bit, How do you get that cut through? How have you built buzz and attention and attraction to the brand, like enough to, you know, be a full-time thing, build a,
I'll come back to your question, Andy, in a sec. I'll just do Felix's now. I didn't mean to. It just happens. I'm very bad at marketing, and a lot of people will laugh at that and think the opposite. But the truth is I do so little marketing.
Yeah.
And this ties into the prior question, where I wish I was better at it, because the regret would be that when I started Schofield, the internet was free. It meant that anything I did on the internet was completely novel. And prior to Schofield, I was running a small design agency where I was doing SEO and websites for other companies, hundreds of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it came to doing my own, I was in the fortunate position to look at even Rolex's website and say, I can do a better job than that. And in fact, I built a huge database of websites in the luxury sector, and I would give them all metrics on a score on points of value, of virtue points. And so I would look at their loading times, I would look at their image sizes, their quality of photographs, their depth of information, how many clicks, all that stuff, right? And I'd be able to score all of the websites and then take all of the best bits and say, right, I can beat those guys. I can build a website that's better. And then back then we were on Flickr, we were on The Fancy, we were all over Pinterest. This was before Instagram, of course. And we had a newsletter, and I spread myself so thin over so many different channels because the internet was free, and it was a true guerrilla marketing effort. Fine, easy to do for me because I was already there, and I only had 2 watches to pitch, right? And what happened was that from underneath me, the internet became expensive. Everything you had to pay for, everything. If I wanted to reach people on Instagram, I now need to, or Facebook, I need to boost my posts. And I took my eye off that ball, really. I became very despondent with social media. I still really dislike social media. I came off Facebook very early, but had to reinstate it for Instagram. You know, all of those kind of things. There's an incredible pressure within business, not only for growth, right, but also for your social media presence, as part of growth. I always believe in efficiency first, growth second. Because if you're efficient, it affords you more time. And with that time, you can choose to grow if you want to, or go home, you know, and listen to music, whatever. So efficiency first. And so my regret would be the fact that I took my eye off the ball with marketing and didn't have a particular channel for my voice where all of my audience would be. And so I've never made 10,000 followers on Instagram because I barely ever post, like once this year, I think, so far, because I just don't have the time. I do everything, by the way, here, everything. So the website is all me. Most of the photography, apart from the hero shots, are all me. I design every 1/10 of a millimeter of every single product and touch point and bits of paper and envelopes and packaging. Everything is me. I do all the case finishing myself. I manage all of the suppliers myself. I do not do the watch assembly. I have a watchmaker that does my assembly. I can, but I'm rubbish at it. And he's really quick. So he does all my assembly and servicing and warranty work. Okay. So everything's me. And then we're here in my shop, the only little shop for Schofield, because we're internet only. The shop is also my office. It is a functioning shop. It's on the high street in a small village just north of Brighton on the south coast of the UK.
Nice.
And the doorbell may ring. And if it does, you know, I've got to go and see who it is. And sometimes it's somebody come to see some watches. And if I'm lucky, they might buy something. So I do not have time to interrupt my workflow by posting to Instagram or Twitter or anything else. That's not my bag, and I'm really bad at it. So one question was, what do I regret? I regret taking my eye off the ball for marketing. The other question was, how do I create a buzz around a niche a niche product? I don't. But what I do have on my side is enthusiasm. Okay. I love what I do. I'm incredibly enthusiastic about all of my pursuits generally. And enthusiasm always comes across as a selling point. It just does. It's always worked for me. It's just one of those things that I'm just lucky that I have it, because if I didn't have that enthusiasm, then selling Schofields would be really hard.
Be tricky. I think I need what's in your coffee, Giles. I want to ask you about collaborations and where they fit in for the brand.
They would fit in. They would fit in, as in you would see more of them if those opportunities either came to me or I went and got those. So a collaboration that we're quite well known for would be the early collaboration with the Black Lamp with Black Badger being James Thompson, currently has a brand called Arcanaut, and he made a name for himself playing with luminescent materials through his rings and his jewelry. Was a bit of an Instagram sensation within his sphere, and we kind of brought him on to help with this glowing ring around the perimeter of the dial of the Black Lamp. And that was a collaboration that was an experience, I would say, and I would love to do more collaborations, and I have a few in the pipeline. The trouble is with collaborations, right, and this is something that people don't always appreciate, is that you want to collaborate uphill. Okay. You don't want to collaborate downhill. And the position of a brand in the early days is in such flux that you can earn cachet for your brand within a few months. You know, you can go from being a nobody to a somebody. And let me just kind of flesh that out for you. When I started in 2011, my business model was 3 watches in year 1, 20 watches in year 2. And when you do a business plan, right, you've got to come up with some nonsense for year 3. So it's 100 watches for year 3, but I never thought that would happen. We sold 300 watches within the first 5 months or so. And so we were suddenly like there. And what was interesting was, you're talking about my databases, right? There's another database for actual watches and pricing. And so because we were internet only, I would give a score, a figure generally out of 5, to other brands' watches for various commercial touch points that you would adhere to if you were buying it online. So let's say that one watch has got a 200-meter water resistance and another has 100 meters. Somehow you feel that 200 meters is better, right? So it has a score that is higher than 100 meters. An alligator strap was viewed, this was 12 years ago, better than a canvas strap. So it scores slightly higher. A deployment buckle is better than a thumbnail buckle somehow, right? An exhibition caseback may be more attractive than a solid caseback. Having complications always boosts your score on a particular watch, right? If it's got a power reserve, then wow, that's going to boost the score right up. But also I would score the brand. So you would have a score for cachet and for history. Okay. Now back then, Panerai was the it boy. And so for cachet, they would score 5 out of 5. And their history is pretty cool as well. So they might score 4 out of 5 for their history. Rolex back then had history, okay, but their cachet was actually lower than Panerai. And with that score, I could then translate that score to price, to help me price the Signalman watch, because I'm like, where do I price this? I know how much it costs, and because of the cost, to make any money, that watch really needs to be £8,000. Okay, but there's no way I can go into launch a watch at £8,000 for a new brand with 0 history and 0 cachet, right? So my price came down to about £3,000. It had to, okay, barely making any money at all. But because I did so well, it meant that my cachet score went up. Yep. Okay, my history didn't move, but my cachet score went from we suddenly were everywhere. It literally went from 0, and I think I probably scored it a 4, and it meant that my price score relationship had to go up as well. And so I said, this was at 6 months, I had to say that the promotional period was over and the watch was going up in price. It went up about £600. It was terrific. I sold 15 watches that day based on the fact that the price was about to go up the following day. Yeah. So, yeah.
I've noticed, Giles, you said you didn't do anything on Instagram. But before this interview, I looked on your Instagram, and I could also see it waving around on your wrist. It's a watch that I'm very interested in, because speaking of collaborations, we did one with Scottish
matching.
Yeah.
What do you know? With Anne Ordain, we made a pink dial watch. So obviously, beautiful. This pink case, it's like a moth to the flame for me. What's going on there? Talk to me about this.
So this is part 2 of a series of watches. This is not my words. A journalist said this. My love letter to Japan. I love Japan. I've been there. My brother lives there. I've always been a Japanophile. I have a lot to say about the Japanese aesthetic. And I wanted to crowbar my love of Japan into a watch. And I did that with one of my bronze beaters, and it was very heavily pre-patinated. In Japan, they call patination of metals the grease of life. They don't view it as unhygienic, whereas in the UK and in the West, we polish our silver and our brass plaques out the front of our houses if we're lucky enough to have a house with a brass plaque on the front, all that kind of stuff. In Japan, they don't, and that patination is beautiful because it's earned. And so I did a fully patinated watch. Now, when I pre-patinate watches, it's not fully stable, by the way. It still changes with you, maybe not as rapidly as a raw bronze watch, but it certainly will change. And after a year, whether you bought raw or patinated, they kind of meet in the middle. So the bronze Japanese beater had an indigo blue dial based on borrow cloth, as in color picked from borrow cloth. It had a heavily patinated case. The strap was dyed. The material was called mud cloth, and it's buried for 8 months of the year in Japan.
Oh, really?
The mud acts as a mordant to the color, as a fixative. And it's a really cool strap, and we still make and sell that strap. And on the back, it had a caseback engraving of Daruma. He's that little red character that you generally see as a good luck character, and with the big eyes is that. And it also has a motif that's based on a Japanese drain cover. Drain covers in Japan are objects of beauty in their own right. They're fully enameled. You'll often see people standing over them, photographing them. You can look on Pinterest for Japanese drain covers, and you'll see this wonderful design and artistic world of drain covers that you didn't know existed, which of course have constraints. And I love that about design. The constraints are the fact it's a drain cover, right? It's got to be heavy, it's got to be round, etc. So I designed this one, and it used the ginkgo and the cherry blossom of a standard Tokyo drain cover for this watch. It was beautiful. And we made 29, and it sold out in about 4 days, that particular watch. Been and gone now. And it was very dark. And so this watch is part 2. This is the light. This is the day, not the underbelly of Japan. There's a lot to see and do in Japan. So this is more based on the sakura, on the cherry blossoms, on the beauty. And so it's got a very pale pinky beige dial, 2-tone pinky beige dial. And this one doesn't have it, but generally it does. It has a case back, which is enameled into a sterling silver badge, essentially.
Okay.
traditionally made by a company in the UK that have been making badges since 1880, and they've never made a badge like mine before in that time. And it's a large domed enamel badge into sterling silver chase work. It's absolutely stunning. And the design I did is a modification of another drain cover, but this time with little cherry blossoms and little buds and an old tree and some moss balls and lots of other Japanese motifs. And it was a way of me going from the laser engraved casebacks that I cannot orientate because our casebacks are screw in.
Yeah.
So because of that, I cannot orientate them. You've got to have a deviation of 0.1 mil, and it will throw it out by 10 degrees. That's just the way, just with an O-ring difference, that will throw that out. But because of the way I do it now with the enamel caseback on this watch, it meant that I could have full color, which I could never do before. And it also meant that I can orientate the caseback because it goes in afterwards, which is why the one I've got on, in case I need to sell it, doesn't have a caseback in at the moment. It goes in right at the end.
Okay.
So this one, it actually comes in a steel case where we bead blast the steel, but very, very low pressure.
Sure.
Which means we get the texture of the bead blast, but it does not knock out the machining marks. I love the machining marks. I call it the fingerprint of its making, of its birth, right? And we tend to keep those in quite a few models, not all of them, but some you'll find them there. And that's the Japanese Beta B5. And it comes on a plum dyed strap. So a canvas strap that's actually been dyed in plum juice. And that's the pink strap. And so that's the yin to the yang of the other Japanese watch. So we have a lovely pair of those watches. This one's nearly sold, another range of 29. I think I've got about 7 of those left of that particular model. A much harder watch to sell because, of course, it's got a pale dial, steel case. This version, which has a bright lilac, it's not quite pink, it's a pinky lilac, so it's got blue in it. It's a ceramic coating. And I favor ceramic coatings over PVD or DLC coatings. We've used tons of DLC, and I still do. Yeah. But I like the ceramic coatings mainly because my guy that does the ceramic coatings is fastidious. That is absolutely perfect. There's no pinholes. There's no bubbles. It's flawless.
Yeah.
And this one I made for my wife, and it's a Beta made for my wife, so it has the nickname the wife beater. It's not something we generally publicize, just as a joke, but it's bright pink, and she wears it, this watch, on a purple silk velvet strap.
Damn.
And it's so pretty, that combination. And we do the buckles as well.
That's cool.
And so I put it on a blue moon strap here. I've got tattoos, and I like straps that match my tattoos, either grey or blue. And so I love it. It's an absolute winning combination. And what's so good about these ceramic coatings is they can be redone. So if you do chip it and you reach a point, maybe at a service interval, where you'll just say, you can get the whole thing recoated.
You can do that. You want it to look fresh and new.
And that's done in the UK, was it? That you did the coating in the UK?
Yes, it's an American gun coating, and we do it in the UK. Wow. Yeah, I mean, his business is Harley Davidson exhausts.
Yeah,
right? I mean, that's generally or airsoft gun, parts. But he happens to be a watch guy, and it's great because he's very happy to do it, and he keeps his filters clean, which is why I get this
it's pretty tricky. It's pretty tricky to get something consistent.
Very tricky to do. Yeah.
Andy might look for get his details off you after the show. So I think we'll wrap it up. Andy's going to ask you for a recommendation in a minute, but I think you've sort of talked us through your watches and your ethos in a lot of detail, and sort of a few things you've touched upon throughout it. And I think that it's something we've talked about with guests in the past. There's something going on in the UK, and you're, early in that scene and that sort of growth and energy, like more than I speak to sort of my journalists in the UK, and everyone's been writing the same story for the last 10 years of like UK watchmaking is the next big thing, but it really does seem to have I don't know if it's going to take over. It's not going to, take over Switzerland or anything, but there seems to be a real synergy between a lot of brands at a similar scale, all doing their own things and doing things that I think are very creative compared to like the more corporate stuff you see in other parts of the world. Is that an outsider perspective, or am I, would you agree?
I do agree in part. So I feel that whether it's made in the UK or whether it would be a French watch scene or another European company outside of Switzerland and Germany, they have equal creative output. But somehow the UK watch scene has hit most of the press outlets, gets a lot of attention. And in part, we have to credit Bremont for that, because Bremont has enormous investments beyond your wildest dreams, so that they are in a position to market themselves into global domination. And there's no doubt that's what they're after, is to move away from the condescending notion of independent or boutique brands like mine. Sure. It's a label that is irrelevant, whether it's independent or not, but it's a way of saying that you're a small watch company, and Bremont certainly is not that. They're a large watch company.
Yeah.
As I see it, there is a sphere of watchmaking that envelops nearly all watchmakers. And at the head of that sphere, you would have brands like Patek Philippe, Lange, those brands that are well established from a cachet and a history point of view that we talked about earlier. Outside of that sphere, you have Rolex, who are completely on their own, doing their own thing. They're a conundrum, but at the same time, a really important economic power, and a force for influence as well. Challenging that, you have Seiko as another point outside of the general sphere. They're disruptive, incredibly conservative, that you spoke about before, but at the same time, with so much subtle detail that they almost become niche, but they're not. They're incredibly conservative. I mean, that's the whole point of them. Mm. Watches that are so in vogue at the moment, like Grand Seiko, that they do threaten the Swiss certainly for wrist space, because every watch collector wants a Grand Seiko in there. And then you have Bremont in the UK that are, I believe, endeavouring, I choose that word carefully, endeavouring to be the third point of that triangle, to be something that is outside of the watch industry, conspicuously not part of the great British watch scene, even though they tout the Union Jack more than anybody else. And the point of the Union Jack is that it is not a badge of honour or disgrace. It doesn't mean anything in the watch world. It's not a stamp to say watches made in the UK are superior to watches anywhere else. Sure. Right? That's just not true for us. I mean, what is true for the UK? I don't know. I mean, I would say brogues, maybe, the shoes with the holes in the brogues. But would it be cutlery anymore? Probably not. Germany and Japan for steel, right? Would it be cars? That's all been exported. Yeah. So I don't know what the Union Jack actually brings to the party. Okay. It just so happens that Bremont gets an incredible amount of press. And then you have, outside of Bremont, lots of smaller satellite companies that have been around now for longer, or around 10 years, like myself, like Fears, for example. Yeah. And now we've got other brands like, like Vertex and Pinion and Elliott Brown, Christopher Ward, of which most people know. Yep. Are all creating a scene. We're just lucky enough at the moment that there are few of us, which means we all still have a place without treading on each other's toes.
Mm.
And we're all separate enough within our niches to not tread on anybody else's toes.
That's a very well answered question.
And if they do, they're going to lose them. Alrighty, Charles. The last question we ask our listeners and our guests is for a recommendation. It can be something that you've enjoyed that you just think, people listening right now are going to also enjoy. It can be a podcast, a book, a movie. It can be a
cultural experience,
a habit. It can be just something you've done or seen or experienced that you want to share. Anything, not watch related.
That is brilliant. Oh man, I could talk about so much. Okay, I'm thinking, which out of my hobbies do I want to pick on? So hi-fi is a big thing for me. So where guys obsess over watches, I'm lucky enough to own a watch company. So I don't necessarily have a watch collection because a Schofield for me is the thing that ticks all the boxes, right? So I am lucky enough to have a watch company which is full of watches. So that thing's done. So I tend to go to hi-fi is my thing. I've always been obsessed with hi-fi, and that gives me an enormous amount of pleasure. But also, a lot of people don't know this, but I teach CrossFit in the evenings, and so I'm a CrossFit instructor. And so if we're going to go off-piste away from watches, my recommendation to people would be to explore intense physical exercise. I would encourage, in fact, let's just go one step further if you've got the time for a second. It's my moral obligation to encourage people to be healthier from a point of view, from a health point of view, right? From a living, having a long health span, enjoying life longer rather than being sick and old for longer. Longevity is not interesting if you're not healthy. And the way to do that is to make very deliberate changes that create an adaptation in your body and in your health. And so in order to do that, you need to move more, and you need to eat better, and you need to de-stress, and you need to get more sleep. Those things are really important. Now, why would a watchmaker tell you this? What authority do I have? I've been teaching CrossFit for about 7 years now. I teach classes 4 nights a week. And I can see the changes it makes in people. And it's really important to do these things so that you can go cycling in Wales with your kids when you're 80 years old.
Health is wealth.
Exercise more, eat better, sleep more, less stress.
Buy Schofield watches.
Buy Schofield watches. Done.
You got it, guys.
Thank you so much, Giles. It's been really, really great chatting to you.
Giles, what a lovely guy, Felix. It was a great suggestion by you to have him on the show. It's
top 3 favourite watch industry Giles.
Well, yeah. I mean, for me, he's top 2. If you want to check out these watches, it's Schofield or Schofield, watchcompany.com. You can buy stuff, you can order stuff, you can chat to them. Follow them on social.
I'm definitely going to follow up about that pink watch. Looks hot.
I think I can see it. And like we said at the start of the show, if you're putting together like a list of favorites, just throw us in the mix together individually. You can leave Felix out. You can put him in. I don't mind.
If you're the editor of like the Forbes 100, Rich podcast list or Time podcast of the year, they're lists we want to be in the consideration for.
Yeah. If you need an expert opinion or a hot take, let us know.
I would also say, though, perhaps if you are on the FBI Most Wanted list organising committee, maybe not us.
Maybe not. But you can do that by emailing us, otthepodcast@gmail.com, or hitting us up on Instagram, ot.podcast. And, of course, join our Discord. We link it up every week. It's a great little time in there. Felix.
I'm away from home.
Yeah, I'll see you next week, Felix.